Hello, everyone. Welcome. Bonjour. Bienvenue. Great. We've got a good group here today. Let's start with interpretation. If you see at the bottom of your Zoom menu, you will see something called interpretation with the image of a globe. Even if you are speaking English and intend to hear things in English today, you still need to select English so that you will hear that. If at any time you are not hearing what the presenters are saying, that is probably the issue. So go ahead and click on your preferred language. I'll hand it over to Hazel now to say this in French.
Merci beaucoup, Erin. Et j'aimerais indiquer aux francophones que si vous avez besoin de l'interprétation simultanée, il faut regarder en bas à droite de votre écran Zoom. Il y a un petit icône qui dit interprétation et il faut choisir français. Si vous voulez l'entendre dans la langue originelle, vous pouvez ne pas choisir. Choisissez off. And I will pass it back to Erin, who I'll just mention would have maybe wanted to add if you're bilingual, you can just leave it off. Thank you, Erin.
Yes, if you're bilingual, great. Do leave it off. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, everyone. So we wanted to start with a land acknowledgement, which is becoming more commonplace. So if anybody wants to add into the chat the lands that you're on, please do so. CWCF gratefully and respectfully acknowledges the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of Indigenous peoples whose presence reaches back to time immemorial and on whose territories we live, work, and cooperate. CWCF recognizes the land acknowledgements are not enough. Regarding the actions that CWCF is taking and will take, it has recently approved an action plan to build justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in the worker co-op movement, including an acknowledgement of our relationships with Indigenous folks and the original folks on these lands. So I wanted to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Chibuktuk on Mi'kmaq territory, also known as Halifax, on the east coast of Canada, the unceded and never surrendered territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And go ahead again, if anybody wants to add their territories to the chat, please do so now. You'll notice that this session is set up as a Zoom meeting instead of a Zoom webinar, which means that we can interact with each other. We can see from the chat button, you can click whether you want to add a comment to everyone or whether you want to select someone to correspond with privately. So that's a great function. I want to acknowledge CWCF for running the conference this way. So it does feel like, in fact, we're in a room together and know who's here and so forth. I also see that lots of people have left their videos on, which is fantastic. So we can have that feeling that we're all together. We do have a few presenters today who are using slides. If you click on the view option, even once the slide is shown, you can still click a gallery view and sort of slide over so you can see a handful of videos still, as well as the slides that are being presented. I'm Erin Hancock. I'm with the International Center for Co-op Management out of the Sobey School of Business at St. Mary's University, and dabble in lots of other areas of the cooperative economy. Our first workshop today is worker co-op financing. We have a lot of very skilled and knowledgeable people here. Certainly cooperative capital has been an issue across all types of cooperatives, and certainly in worker cooperatives especially. So we get to have these folks here today to let us know what are the tools available, what is looked at as appealing when applying for financing and funding, and options that we have on the table for that. So hopefully everybody walks away with a little bit more knowledge about all of that and seeing some new opportunities. I wanted to now share a little bit about the speakers that we have here today. We have 4 speakers and then a bonus 5th speaker. So if you didn't see Sally Miller from the Fair Finance Fund on the agenda yet today, this is a bonus person that we've been able to add before our discussions today. So thanks, Sally, for being here. We also have kicking off today, Julia Vlad, who leads the investment and portfolio management for the Community Forward Fund and the Canadian Cooperative Investment Fund at Newmarket Funds out of Toronto. She has over 10 years of experience in banking, finance, and the nonprofit sector. Her experience includes investing and portfolio management at World Bank's private sector arm, IFC, in Panama, Senegal, and the USA, advising social entrepreneurs social entrepreneurs and an accelerator in Nicaragua and financial analysis and forecasting at Scotiabank. She holds an MBA from HEC Paris and a Bachelor of Commerce from the University of Toronto and is a CFA charter holder. Following her, we have Bernard Lindoul, a financial and management advisor with MCE Consulting out of Montreal. He's the manager with more than 15 years of experience in financing and management support with collective economy organizations and SMEs. He also works as a trainer with organizations locally and internationally. He's been on CWCF's Tenacity Works Fund Investment Committee since 2005. Thanks both of you for being here. Following those two, we'll have Brian Eiler, who practices commercial law in Toronto. He advises a host of cooperatives, charities, and nonprofits. He's a co-founder and board member of TREC, which incubated SolarShare and now Tapestry Community Capital. He has advised on many successful cooperative and nonprofit financings, and with Tanya Sermon of the Center for Social Innovation, developed the concept of the community bond. So, very excited about hearing more about that too as a financing tool. And then we have Hazel Corcoran, who you all hopefully know very well by now, the executive director for CWCF, and has been in that role since 1995. Huge contribution to the sector, and also 2009 to 2017 of the Cooperative Zone Co-op Developers Network. Hazel's been involved in all aspects of worker co-op development and support, including capitalization, advisory services, research writing, and more, as you all know. She's been involved as a manager or director with other types of cooperatives as well, including Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada. She's been on the board of the Co-operators. She's also co-founder and director of the Big Idea Rainbow Foundation, whose purpose is to promote the cooperative movement through popular culture. She's on the steering committee of Secopa North America and Secopa Americas. So we're very, very lucky to have those folks join us today. And our bonus person, Sally Miller, the project manager for the Fair Finance Fund. She has worked in sustainable food and agriculture and co-ops for over 25 years, including the local food and farm co-ops, Ontario Natural Food Co-op, Organic Meadow, Fourth Pig Worker Co-op, West End Food Co-op in Canada, and Finger Lakes Organic Growers Co-op in the US. She's on various boards and also has various publications. So thank you to our 5 speakers today. I'm now going to just continue to encourage you. I see lots of folks are already in the chat. Please continue to do that. If you have any questions throughout, you can add those to the chat as well. We'll be watching. We will do questions once all of the speakers have presented, which will be roughly 10 minutes each. And then we'll have a fair amount of time for discussions and questions at the end, or for you all to share your examples, experiences, gripes, questions in the event at that time as well. So I will now hand it over to Julia. Thanks everyone for being here.
Sorry, apologies for that. I started sharing my screen and then it moved to my other screen. So apologies for the technical issues. Thank you very much, Erin, for the introduction. Very great to speak to you all today. I, as Erin mentioned, work for Newmarket Funds, which is the fund manager for the Canadian Cooperative Investment Fund. But actually, I'm going to first speak to you a little bit about social finance in general and set some context for the rest of the conversations. And then I'll talk a little bit more about CCIF and some example of financing that we've done to support cooperatives, because I think for me, one of the key takeaways is to just make sure that you have a broader understanding of options available to you. Maybe CCIF is the right one. Maybe it's a different fund. Maybe it's a different type of funding altogether. But just to make sure that you have a broad understanding of some of the options available to you and how you might actually think about combining them when you're thinking about financing your cooperative. So starting a little bit about why we're even doing this, CCIF has seen a fair amount of gaps in funding that organizations usually use. Government support, there's been a lot of competition and slow disbursements, or disbursements in tranches, leaving co-ops to struggle with working capital in between those 2 tranches of disbursements. There's also fewer options for new cooperatives because a lot of lenders and funders of different kinds do look for experience and some established financials. So The other issue that we've seen is a lack of flexibility in funds that are available. So a lot of time organizations can access that are established can access senior debt, that's secured on property, but there's less available subordinated or other types of flexible financing. And for housing or co-ops looking to acquire real estate, there can be some situations where the timelines for acquisitions of a property, because you're competing with commercial buyers, can be quite tight. So there have been, unfortunately, a number of opportunities that have been lost in terms of acquisitions because of tight turnaround from the usual financing sources. So when you're thinking about your financing choices, there's more than just grants, there's more than just loans, there's also, to the point Erin made, and Brian will, I'm sure, speak more to it when his turn comes on community bonds. There are also hybrid investments, and I'll touch on this briefly shortly. And there's also equity and quasi-equity type of investment that you can access depending on the type of organization. One key takeaway is that there's no single best approach for funding because every co-op has its own set of constraints, assets, opportunities, and vision for growth. As you look at this for organizations that are nonprofit cooperatives, already you can see that perhaps even the equity piece is not something that is relevant to you. And for every type of investment out there, there are actually multiple organizations that will be providing it. So as a result of this, you should really, when you're speaking to an investor, understand their own expectations, whether it's on the equity for a return, whether it's on loans for interest and impact, and understand really what it is that they're looking for, because a loan from one organization may not look exactly the same as a loan from a different organization. I should also mention the chart before mentioned non-grant supports, but there's a couple of new ones that have come across my in my inbox, I guess. Desjardins has a good Sparks grants available currently for up to $20,000, and to keep an eye out for the investment readiness program. Round 2 is expected sometime in the next year, but there's no definitive date on that. Just keep an eye out on that. Cooperatives are definitely able and encouraged to apply. There were a number of cooperatives that did successfully receive financing in the previous round, but it was a small percentage of the number of organizations. So keep an eye out on that for investment readiness grants. Somewhere in the range of 10 to 100,000 was the first round. Hopefully it'll be the same for the second round. So now that I've put some different options out there for you to consider, before actually applying, an organization is encouraged to assess their own internal assets, needs, risks, and capacity. So what should you be thinking about? Your financing need. How much do you need and when do you need it? Do you need it all at once? Especially if you're taking out a loan, can you tranche it so you're not paying interest on the full amount right up front? If you need 100,000 today and 100,000 6 months from now, work with your lender and see if they will be willing to provide you based on your actual needs for funding on that schedule. The duration and then amortization, specifically when it comes to loan, but also when it comes to things like preferred share that are expected to be redeemed. How much can you actually pay? So a loan that is amortizing over 5 years will have a different payment schedule versus one that is amortizing over 20 years. No lender should be looking to lend to you if that's going to put you in distress. So make sure when you approach a lender, you're actually doing the analysis of how much can you actually pay monthly so that it's not putting your organization at risk. In the case where you're doing any kind of improvements, leasehold improvements, acquisition, or development of some type of real estate, really consider a contingency and make sure that it is a substantial one to make sure that you are not running out of funds and then scrambling for financing at the last minute, which may not be the most advantageous. Every type of financing also comes with risk, so you should consider the impact of borrowing and covenants. You should consider your capacity. So what assets can you leverage? You know, assets aren't just your building or equipment, but it's also your contracts. Do you have definitive contracts with government or some other customers that you can borrow against if you need to? And there's also your community, talking about community bonds. Can you engage with your broader community? Can you engage with your broader community in the context of equity and support members for your cooperative? Also look at your organizational capacity and how much you can handle at one time. Can you handle both taking out a loan and raising capital and running your organization? Look at your governance. Is your board supportive and understanding all of these options that are available to you? And if not, how can you make them comfortable and be able to apply for the type of financing that will be most beneficial for your cooperative? And then if you're undertaking a type of management, will you have the capacity to run it in-house, or will you need consultants? So we talked a little bit about the types of financing, and I mentioned loans as if they were one thing, but really the thing to keep in mind also with loans is that loans are a number of different things and can be structured in a number of different ways. So you can have everything from a short-term revolving line of credit that has you borrow as you need and you repay it, to bridge financing, which typically can be used for things like if you are raising a community bond, but you need actually access to the funds before that community bond raise has been completed, can you then use a bridge loan to take you from where you are today to the point where you will have the community bonds and be able to repay the bridge loan. Typically, these tend to be interest only. So if you have a definitive source of repayment and the financing is shorter term, somewhere in the 3 to 24 months, this might be a good type of loan for the organization, just to make sure that you're not having to also at the same time pay amortization, because you know you will have the repayment source at the end, whether it's a community bond raise or perhaps if you're developing property when you're receiving your construction financing, and then you're able to acquire land and do the pre-development work using a bridge loan. We can also, of course, have construction loans for longer term, for construction of real estate assets. And then you can have longer term loans, things like capital loans, mortgages, term loans that have longer maturities and amortizations. Another type of financing to be aware of, depending on your type of organization, this might not be right for everybody. And if this is something that you're interested in, I encourage you to reach out so we can discuss in further detail. But hybrid financing has elements of both debt and equity. So typically this involves some sort of, on the part of the financing provider, some sort of participation in your success. So this can be in the example of subordinated debt. It could be also in the example of revenue-based loans. So rather than having a set interest rate, you might have a loan that has a payment based on 10% of your revenues. Many other types of hybrid instruments are also available, including things like preferred shares that are self-liquidating. So there's a redemption and a repurchase over a period of years. The benefit of that is that typically with preferred shares, you have a dividend rate, but it's not interest. So you're still choosing to issue dividends. One of the key things that I want to leave you with before talking about CCIF with is, again, you can combine different types of sources and at different times. And it may be that one source of financing helps get you from phase A to phase B. So for example, in example one, you're looking to, your ideal capital structure is to raise a fair bit of community bonds because you have a very strong supportive community. you are acquiring a property, or perhaps even for a conversion to a worker cooperative where you have a vendor take back that is going to be paid over a number of years. Perhaps you have some grant funding, but the community bond will not be available because it takes some time to raise immediately, and the vendor does need to receive some payment sooner. So you can use a bridge loan, or perhaps you would like to help to have your investors participate in the success of the organization. So you might use a revenue-based loan. One of the key things to keep in mind is what a lender might ask for. I think these slides can be shared, so I don't spend a lot of time just reading what's already on the slide, but most lenders have specific items that they're looking for. This tends to be a general list to make sure that you are aware broadly what you should be putting together. And then on top of the actual documents that they might ask, keep in mind that people are looking for, accurate reporting, statements that have good accounting practices, a clear business plan, a plan for growth, but one that is realistic and measurable. So because my time is running out, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and tell you about CCIF. CCIF was a fund that was established by Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada alongside CWCF, credit unions, and the cooperators. We provide all of the types of loans and financing that I have mentioned, from bridge lending to long-term loans to hybrid financing, and potentially equity in the right situation. Our products tend to be flexible, and we tailor them to the cooperative. We provide anywhere between 50,000 and 1.25 million, could be a little bit higher depending on the organization and the need. And then I'm going to just skip ahead and let you know a little bit about the type of examples of organizations that we've worked with. A worker cooperative, Sumac, Community Worker Cooperative, Planet Bean. We provided them with a term loan to refinance their debt and provide for working capital. This is a 6-year amortizing loan. We've also worked with Compass, Nova Scotia. This is a housing cooperative. They have a couple of existing properties, but they were looking to acquire land and develop new housing. We provided them with part of the loan for the acquisition of the property and follow-on financing to help them do the pre-development work. We worked alongside the CMHC and Housing Nova Scotia to be able to provide this financing. We also worked with Fredericton Bouldering Cooperative, a bouldering gym out in New Brunswick. We provided them with this is a startup organization. We provided them with a term loan and for 5 years, but that had a 12-month interest only period in order to allow the organization to really set up their organization before the payments became larger. This allowed them to make the leasehold improvements that they needed, purchase the equipment and the supports that they needed, and some working capital for the organization. And we've also recently worked with Noel's Funeral Home and the Fédération de Coopératives Funéraires du Québec. We provided them with 2 loans alongside with other financing partners. This again goes back to the concept of trying to work with, you don't have to work with only one financing partner, and you don't have to only work with one type of financing. We provided them with a senior loan and a subordinated loan to help them acquire a funeral home with 3 locations for the purpose of converting it into a cooperative. And that is it. Thank you very much for your time and patience. Hopefully this was helpful, and I will pass it back over.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you so much for that context setting, for sure. We're going to hear from Bernard next, who doesn't have slides, so we just get to look at your face and the others who are here at the conference, so thank you. If anybody has questions for Julia, please write them down now so that we can keep them for the discussion period. Over to you, Bernard.
Thank you, Erin. Bonjour tout le monde. Merci Julia pour cette présentation vraiment très, très intéressante. Je vais faire une petite liaison avec ce que Julia vient de nous partager, tout le monde. Et mon intervention va plus se concentrer sur le cas spécifique des coopératives de travail. Parce que moi, je suis impliqué dans le comité d'investissement du CWCF Fund, qui a un focus sur le groupe de travail un peu partout au Canada depuis quelques années. Et mon souhait, c'est de vous partager un cas vécu et quelques points importants qui sont souvent regardés par les financiers et bailleurs de fonds lorsqu'il s'agit des coopératives de travail spécifiquement. C'est bien sûr valable pour l'ensemble de types de coopératives, mais les exemples que je vais partager portent plus sur les groupes de travail en tant que tels. Et vous allez pouvoir voir le lien avec ce que Julia vient de présenter si brillamment tout à l'heure. Donc, la première chose que je vais juste en complément de ma présentation, moi c'est Bernard, je travaille depuis 15-20 ans dans le milieu du financement bancaire, fonds d'investissement, etc. Et j'ai notamment passé presque 10 ans chez Desjardins à financer des coopératives de toutes sortes, dont les coopératives de travail. Et ça m'a amené à constater plusieurs éléments importants et récurrents dont je pense l'importance est assez majeur lorsqu'il s'agit de se présenter devant des bailleurs de fonds et comprendre les points principaux au niveau de ce qui est majeur pour financer les coopératives de travailleurs. Donc, premier point, je vais vous parler de capitalisation. Vous allez comprendre pourquoi. Deuxième point, je vais vous parler d'équipe. Et le troisième point, c'est je vais vous parler de modèle d'affaires au niveau de la commercialisation. J'ai un exemple d'une coopérative qui me semble pertinent. C'est une coopérative de travailleurs qui s'appelle La Barberie. Ils sont au Québec et je pense que certains d'entre vous les connaissent. Et je vais vous raconter un petit peu leur histoire. Les 3 points dont je vous ai parlé, vous allez voir dans quelle mesure c'est important de les comprendre et c'est quoi le lien entre ce que des partenaires financiers regardent comme facteurs principaux et l'histoire de cette coopérative-là qui a été un exemple intéressant pour d'autres coopératives de travailleurs qui pourraient s'inspirer de leur vécu. Donc, je reviens sur un premier point qui est souvent regardé avec attention par des financiers pour les coopératives de travailleurs, c'est la question de la capitalisation. Et autant la capitalisation interne que la capitalisation externe. La capitalisation interne vient bien sûr de plusieurs sources. Ce que je veux dire par là, c'est qu'on fait appel aux profits et aux excédents que la coopérative génère au fur et à mesure de son opération et qu'elle réinvestit dans ses opérations. Ça, c'est une source de capitalisation parce que ça vient augmenter sa part d'équité dans la durée de vie de l'organisation, premier élément. Cette capitalisation peut aussi venir de l'investissement des travailleurs dans la coopérative à travers leur propre de fonds, leur achat de parts, parce que c'est une façon aussi de démontrer dans quelle mesure il s'agit de l'importance à la réussite de la coopérative et il y a un élément de cohérence vis-à-vis des bailleurs de fonds externes qui sont sollicités, des fonds ou des institutions financières, pour le dire que nous aussi, en tant que travailleurs, nous croyons beaucoup dans notre coopérative et nous y investissons pour faire partie des solutions par rapport à la capitalisation en tant que telle. Donc ça, c'est 2 exemples de capitalisation interne qui sont pertinents pour les coopératives de travailleurs et qui sont souvent regardés par les bailleurs de fonds parce que c'est un élément qui fait une différence dans la viabilité à long terme de la coopérative. Donc ça, c'est pour la capitalisation interne. La capitalisation externe peut venir de plusieurs sources. Julia en a présenté certains dans ces slides qui étaient tous plus intéressants les uns que les autres. Et là-dessus, des parts privilégiées, par exemple, peuvent être prises par un bailleur de fonds externe qui vient augmenter la capitalisation de la coopérative et vient être un complément à l'assiette de capitalisation que la coopérative de travailleurs aura utilisée à travers ses propres ressources internes. Donc, retournons sur ce premier point-là sur la capitalisation qui est vraiment importante et qui est souvent regardée par les financiers pour les codes de travail spécifiquement. Et pourquoi? Parce que ça vient définir, entre autres, la capacité de réinvestissement à long terme de la coopérative. Nous, financiers, nous allons souvent regarder dans quelle mesure cette coopérative-là qui vient nous voir a soit actuellement une capacité de réinvestissement intéressante ou dans le futur, dans quelle mesure elle a des chances de la bâtir dans le temps. Et ça, c'est un élément assez important qu'on regarde. Et pour le mesurer, on regarde c'est quoi les sources qui proviennent de là, d'où la question de la capitalisation interne et de la capitalisation externe. Donc ça, c'était pour la capitalisation en tant que telle. Un autre facteur qu'on regarde beaucoup, c'est la complémentarité dans l'équipe entre les travailleurs. La complémentarité des compétences et la complémentarité de l'équipe. Les expertises qui sont apportées par les différents travailleurs, même s'ils sont dans le même domaine, qu'on soit dans la traduction, qu'on soit dans l'éducation de l'environnement, qu'on soit dans l'entretien ménager, etc., on essaie quand même de regarder dans quelle mesure il y a une complémentarité dans les compétences et les profils des différents travailleurs pour, par exemple, voir qui a une compétence, disons, par rapport aux chiffres, par rapport à la comptabilité, par rapport à l'élément financier, qui a une plus grande compétence par rapport à la commercialisation, par rapport au développement des ventes, qui a une plus grande compétence par rapport au produit lui-même. Et on cherche un élément principal qui est vraiment la complémentarité entre toutes ces compétences-là. Parce que, je vous le dis, et croyez-moi, après 15-20 ans de pratique, c'est un élément vraiment important en tant que tel. Et le troisième élément, qui n'est pas le moindre, c'est la pérennité du modèle de commercialisation. Et ce que je veux dire par là, c'est vraiment l'exemple de la barbarie dont je vais parler rapidement tout de suite après. C'est le fait de pouvoir s'assurer que les sources de revenus sont assez diversifiées pour ne pas dépendre d'une source de revenus et que l'ancrage dans le milieu de la coopérative et son stratégie de commercialisation sont vraiment cohérentes pour donner une pérennité long terme. Je vais prendre 2 minutes pour vous parler de la coopérative de la Barbarie qui existe depuis plus de 20 ans au Québec, notamment basée dans la région de Québec. Les 3 éléments dont je vous ai parlé sur la capitalisation, la complémentarité dans l'équipe et la pérennité du modèle de commercialisation, ces 3 éléments-là, ce sont 3 facteurs qui ont beaucoup joué dans la réussite de la Barbarie jusqu'à aujourd'hui. Parce que c'est une microbrasserie qui produit des produits de bière et qui devait acheter des équipements. Ils ont dû utiliser leur capitalisation interne et aller faire appel à la capitalisation externe pour pouvoir financer leur développement au fur et à mesure des années. Premier élément. L'équipe telle qu'elle est actuellement et telle qu'elle était au début, la question de la complémentarité dans les compétences a toujours été importante. Dans la connaissance des équipements de production, dans la commercialisation, ça a été toujours important. Et troisièmement, au niveau de la pérennité du modèle d'affaires, il y a un élément qui a qui a été très, très
Vraiment.
important dans leur cas. Oui.
2 minutes.
Merci. Il y a un élément qui a été très important dans leur cas, c'est le fait d'être vraiment bien ancré dans leur milieu. Ça a été un facteur de succès dans leur commercialisation parce que pour le marché et le produit qu'ils avaient à desservir, le fait d'être connu dans leur territoire et d'être pertinent par rapport à la communauté qu'ils desservent a assuré non seulement un bassin de clients important au départ et qui s'est maintenu au fur et à mesure des années, mais aussi a contribué à leur notoriété à travers des avantages marketing qu'ils n'auraient pas pu bénéficier eux-mêmes. Donc, leur exemple est intéressant en termes de corps de travailleurs pour un peu vous illustrer dans quelle mesure les bailleurs de fonds portent vraiment une grande attention à ces 3 facteurs-là, qui ne sont pas les seuls, mais que je voulais absolument vous partager parce qu'ils me semblent vraiment fondamentaux pour les corps de travailleurs spécifiquement. Je vais m'arrêter là pour ne pas prendre plus de temps et j'espère que d'autres questions permettront d'aller un peu plus loin. Mais je le répète, la capitalisation interne-externe, la complémentarité dans l'équipe de travail au niveau des compétences et des profils et la pérennité du modèle de commercialisation à travers l'ancrage dans les milieux sont vraiment des facteurs importants qu'on regarde en tant que financier pour les groupes de travailleurs. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Bernard. Great, very helpful. It's excellent to hear the examples that I provided too. So we get the context, we get, the tips and the inside knowledge today, but we're also hearing some of these examples of co-ops that some of us are familiar with and maybe have had a beer at now and then.
Why not?
Great. So we're going to head now over to Brian Eiler. Sorry for that. Thank you so much to our 2 speakers so far. And I know Brian's going to be sharing his screen, so go ahead and get that up there, Brian, and thanks for being here.
I think that's it. Do you have it there, Julia?
Yes, it's looking good.
You got it?
Brian.
Okay,
yeah.
Excellent. So thanks for having me and appreciated the input from the financier side. I'm going to talk more about the co-op side, going out and figuring out how to find the capital they need. Let's see. Change. So who finds the prospect of raising money for your co-op scary? It's a daunting prospect to my mind, and every time I've approached that with organizations I'm involved with, there's a lot of questions and a lot of difficulty answering them, particularly if we're looking for financing outside the organization from funders like the fund or Desjardins. So what are those questions? Where do you start? Who do you ask? How do you ask? What should you sell, bonds or shares? If bonds, is there security you can offer? What rate of return should you offer? What term? How will you repay when they fall due? If shares, how do you design them in a way that people will want to buy them, but at the same time not overly burden the co-op? Who will buy them? Who do you ask? How do you ask? Well, then we'll not answer all of these, but we'll share how 2 co-ops I've worked closely with answered those questions and found success. First, though, co-ops do have a distinct advantage compared to businesses. They're established to meet a community's needs, and that community will provide support, including financial support, if a good case is made. For co-ops, the place to start your search for capital is your community, those who love what you do and want to see it succeed. Kind of like an ordinary small business startup where friends and family are their primary and often only source. Because of that community orientation, co-ops are usually exempt from the severe restrictions securities commissions place on small and medium businesses trying to raise capital. But note, I'm an Ontario lawyer, and that doesn't necessarily apply to other provinces or territories. A worker co-op's community of support is, first of all, its member employees, and second, those who appreciate and support the social value of the cooperative model for employee empowerment. Co-ops have disadvantages too. Co-op shares don't appreciate in value with the success of the co-op's business. Their par value, when they're sold back to the co-op, investors are repaid the price they originally paid. There's no resale market, no stock exchange for co-ops that sets the market price and allows investors to decide when to sell their shares. Most of the time, the only place to sell shares is back to the co-op if it is willing or able to buy them. That means that co-op shares aren't very attractive to those who primarily seek a return based on the success of the business.
Brian?
Yes?
Just for the interpreters, because you're saying so much gold, we just need you to slow down a little bit more.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'll try. That means that co-op shares aren't very attractive to those who are primarily seeking a return based on the success of the business. If successful, the return can be huge, but not for co-op investments. The Big Carrot is a successful worker cooperative health food store in downtown Toronto. When it was founded back in 1983, each member agreed to invest $5,000 in a share, which didn't change in value, and was repaid without dividend when the member left. For those who didn't have the cash, the local credit union was willing to loan the money, and the co-op guaranteed the loan. If your members aren't also all investors, your potential outside investors won't be impressed. Finding capital is never easy. You'll find it in various ways. For the Big Carrot, one member with her husband agreed to mortgage their home to provide more capital. A number of store customers agreed to buy preference shares that carried a 10% dividend, cumulative, so that if not paid in a given year, it would have to be paid before dividends on any other shares or patronage returns could be issued. Again, the shares had par value and were redeemable. The co-op could require the shareholder to accept the par value of the share and any arrears of dividends, and on payment, the shares became the property of the co-op. Investor shares can also be retractable, where at the option of the shareholder, the co-op can be compelled to pay the investor out. You'll want some conditions on that to ensure the co-op isn't put into financial difficulty by that obligation. And for the Big Carrot, a community supporter came through with the financing needed to buy and renovate what was a car dealership. Together, he and the Big Carrot bought the property and continue to share ownership today. Co-ops have an advantage. They can go well beyond that small circle of family and friends to all of those who value you and will trust you with their money, as the Big Carrot did so successfully. SolarShare is a renewable energy co-op incubated by Toronto Renewable Energy Co-op, or TREC. It has now over 2,000 members and 51 projects throughout Ontario. It decided it could more readily raise capital if it was structured as a not-for-profit, and raise the capital it needed by selling bonds, not shares. Bonds initially paid 5% on a 5-year term, and later 15-year term bonds were offered, which paid 6%. The co-op has been hugely successful. It has now raised over $43 million in bond sales, financing impressive growth. And here's their, this is production year over year, starting with the early years. And you can see how in the first year there was not much being produced, but you were up to $18 million a year in almost $18 million a year, or 18 million kilowatt hours, sorry, in terms of production of electricity. To hedge against fluctuating interest rates, SolarShare secured 15-year term debt from a life insurance company for another $14 million at a fixed rate. SolarShare tapped into huge pent-up capital, a huge pent-up demand for investment that are reasonably secure, provide a reasonable return on investment, engage community, and make the world a better place. Well, you don't know until you go to market. We at SolarShare felt pretty certain that the demand was there. Currently, as no new projects are being developed and the cooperative's income is stable, the board felt that new bonds could sell at a 4% return over 5 years. They were proven right. $10 million was raised recently to repay those whose bonds have matured and opted not to reinvest, and to finance the acquisition of 2 additional projects. The downside of selling bonds is that, unlike shares, they have to be repaid when they mature, and we can't predict with certainty what market conditions for raising the money to replace them might be, nor what proportion will renew. Built into SolarShare's business plan is a fairly large contingency to address the prospect of high interest rates. Since it is not for profit on dissolution, its net assets are not paid to members, but are applied to further the development of renewable energy through other not-for-profit organizations. One of the ways to address a co-op's lack of experience in raising capital is to ask those who have done it before for help. Because there's so much experience in SolarShare in raising capital, TREC, itself a nonprofit cooperative, has incubated a new business arm, Tapestry Community Capital, that acts as a consultant for a modest fee to cooperatives, nonprofits, and charities to assist them in marketing their bonds and shares. Tapestry can give your co-op the confidence it needs to successfully raise the capital you need. I look forward to...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm done. Yep.
You are done.
There you go.
I was just going to say you have a minute, but
yeah.
You've been great. Thank you, Brian. Thanks so much for all of that.
You're welcome.
Great examples, great information for everybody to take home with them today. Wonderful. So we can, and right on time. I mean, leave it to Brian to be exactly on time. Over to Hazel now. Hazel, I know you have some slides to share. Go right ahead.
And I'm going to get those up right away and go to slideshow. Okay, can you see those okay? Good. So thanks everyone, and what great other speakers to be on this panel with. Thank you all. I'm going to be speaking about the Tenacity Works Fund of CWCF, and also what we're calling now, as of about 2 weeks ago, our RSP TFSA program, Common Good Capital, is our branding as we seek to promote the RSP TFSA program more. This is going to be starting with an intro on why the focus on capital by CWCF. Next, specifics on the Tenacity Works Fund, and then talking about our registered plans program. And I'm going to spend probably more time on the fund than on the RSP plan. Okay, screen, you need to advance. Thank you. So first of all, why does CWCF focus so hard on capitalization? And perhaps it's obvious, but obviously many worker cooperatives are challenged by getting capital for a variety of reasons, some of which we've heard before. A lot of people who start worker co-ops are not people with experience in the business world. I think there's a need for support around the way that they see capital. And we've heard some of the technical kind of, types of capital and issues and things that financiers are looking for. And, I think we can help to kind of coach worker co-ops in terms of knowing what needs to be done. But the other piece is it's one of the uniting challenges that worker co-ops face because, of course, unlike other co-op sectors, housing or credit unions or what have you, worker co-ops in all different industry sectors, but all face the common challenge of capitalization, right? So it's a thing that is a unifying piece in the movement. The thing I wanted to say about how the Common Good Capital or Registered Plans program fits into CWCF is that it's actually half of what we do all the time in terms of staff time, in terms of revenues, in terms of everything about the organization, even though if you look carefully at our strategic plan presentation as part of the annual report and the AGM, it doesn't even fit exactly into any of our 3 priorities. It fits into other. And so it's an interesting fact, I guess, that this RSP TFSA plan, which takes up fully half our staff hours and accounts for half our revenue and actually creates a lot of extra surplus that enables us to run the rest of our programming. It doesn't fit our mandate exactly, or doesn't fit our priorities exactly. So the way I view it is that this program is like a social enterprise within CWCF that lets us run our other programming. But to some, it might be viewed as off to the side. I don't think it is, and we'll get into why. And when I have this point, lastly, about the $70 million topic, what I mean is that 70 million is the amount that's under administration in our RSP TFSA program. And we're a very small organization, of course, with less than $500,000 in revenues. And we're running this program with this huge number in it. And we'd like to pull that number out when we're presenting to the broader sector, because I think it shows the capacity that what we've got. And it also kind of informed our earlier decision in the beginning of the pandemic that we should look for 70 million in our fund. And we've kind of drawn back from that in a way, although that is still a long-term goal. Okay, now getting into the details of the fund, and I do have to be careful on time here, but Tenacity Works is a revolving fund, and the current assets are about $400,000, and that includes a $250,000 pledge to CCIF. So obviously, do the math, like there's 150,000, a little bit of which is currently placed, but that's available to place in worker co-ops right now, and that's clearly not enough, especially when I get into some of what our plans are. So it's modeled very much on the Arctic Co-op Development Fund, or ACDF, in the North, which has been a highly successful fund that does co-op development finance in Indigenous communities, mostly in the territories, and also Shared Capital Cooperative in the US and the Co-op Fund of New England. And I think what we really learn and know from those other funds, the latter two are very focused on worker co-op development and related types. It's the importance of pairing capital with technical assistance. And if you don't do that, your fund is not going to succeed. And I should say our fund was started with a little over $1 million from what was then HR, Human Resources Development Canada, basically because a champion wanted it to happen, and not because there was any program that made it work, that made it fit. It should have been gone by now, but we've managed it carefully, and we've been able to maintain this amount. And it was always conceived as a pilot with a much larger fund to follow on the order of 20 million. And, we now hope, well, the inflation would have that, say, 35 or 40 million, and we hope that would be even larger. I've got to be careful with my cursor there. Anyway, there's a size of loans, 15 to 50,000, which is smaller than, I think the CCIF starts at 50. And we could certainly change that if we did grow the fund. And it's only for worker co-ops and other kinds of co-ops substantially owned by workers. Legally, everything is a term loan, but they function like quasi-equity, these loans. Excuse me, and it can include some upfront granting elements, which could be integrated into capital. We haven't done that in a while since we're, past the pilot stage by quite a few years, and we're, looking at too small a capital base at the moment. But we can certainly partner with our technical assistance granting program. Members have to invest at least 15% of all capital and a bare minimum of 1,000 per member. Could be over time if absolutely necessary. That's not preferred. No more than 1/3 of all capital raised can come from the Tenacity Works Fund. We're trying to be a fund that leverages in others. Eligible are existing CWCF members, startups that join CWCF, and conversions from other business types which join CWCF. So part of the vision is that we need capital within the sector itself, which is directed and controlled by the sector, which understands the particularities and the challenges and the strengths. It's not a substitute for other conventional financing or other financing of any type, but a strategic vehicle that's controlled by the sector and directed by the sector. Collaboration with CCIF is possible and welcome from our fund's perspective. And we always ask our members who are applying to CCIF to inform us, because certainly it's possible to look at going together and or working along with CCIF as well. I have to slow down. I'm sorry, I didn't see that till now.
And about 3 minutes left, Hazel.
Okay, thank you for that warning. So I think that those points have already been made, and the key points to add: our interest rates are now in a range of 4 to 8% annually, tied to prime. We seek to grow the fund still, and we're looking forward very much to the time that the Federal Social Finance Fund, which was announced 3 years ago, actually starts to roll out. There's $750 million announced by the feds, and we'll see how that goes. It's, yeah, complicated, long story, but eventual goal is 70 million. There's a proposal you could find on our website. But, as I said, we're really talking about incremental growth right now. And the main kind of lobbying we're doing is more around technical assistance for conversions and taxation issues and such. And one interesting element is we might look to, in a year when the CBIL loans are all going to come due, that many worker co-ops have taken out, to look at prioritizing making loans in capital, so that the capital that you have to pay back in order to keep the grant portion is available to worker co-ops. And we've already started a list of worker co-ops that want that to happen. And I expect that demand is going to significantly outstrip supply. So we might be looking for partners to do that if we haven't gotten Social Finance Fund money by then. Okay, in my remaining luxurious 90 seconds, I'll talk about their RSP program, probably skipping the slides completely. But basically, as I mentioned, we're rebranding it because we seek to grow it. The program had been growing very rapidly, kind of organically, and it's sort of stopped growing with the pandemic. So we're going to be marketing it, so hence the new name. We plan to trademark it, haven't done that yet. We work along with Concentra Trust. It's available to regular members that are worker co-ops, which are large enough to use it, which means they basically have to have at least 11 members, which is not that high a percentage, or associate members that issue qualified securities. This is the size of the program. It includes Trek that Brian spoke to, includes Just Us Coffee Roasters, many CDIPs and others. Sometimes we work in conjunction with Tapestry Capital, and it's a very exciting development. I'm just going to not share these slides because I can't speak to them, but I do want to just skip ahead to the end and let you all know that lots of details about both programs are on our website, and we're going to share these presentations. And also there will be other presentations given by the RSP program staff who are on this call, including the SEDNet one in early December. That's on going to be, that many of you might want to check out for a variety of reasons. It's on different investment vehicles that are out there across the country. And I know that our staff will be presenting. All those slides I skipped, you could see them presented and spoken to and not just read them. So I think that's it for me. Thanks.
Great. And nice teaser for more learning. Great. Thank you, Hazel. Excellent. Happy to hear all of that. Okay. Great. Let's move on to Sally Miller, our final speaker today, just for a couple of minutes to tell us a bit about the Fair Finance Fund And go ahead, Sally, if you want to start sharing your screen, and then make sure folks to either add your questions to the chat or to write them down so you can voice them in our discussion period to follow after Sally's presentation. Go ahead, Sally.
So greetings, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm going to be talking about the Fair Finance Fund, which actually came out of the local food and farm co-op network, with our member co-ops saying in every annual consultation that they were having trouble getting access to capital. So we were hearing the same issue, and the LFFC includes worker co-ops and all kinds of co-ops and local food and farm sector. So we are dedicated to providing affordable financing for purpose-driven local production for regional markets from field to fork to field. So in the local food and farm sector in Ontario, we provide affordable loans up to 200,000. All of our enterprises that we support have social purpose, which they're able to show and which they track over the entire 5 years of the loan. So that's very important. It's actually the first thing we check. And then we go through the sort of regular due diligence, which Julie did a wonderful overview of. So I'm thinking of having her come in and talk to our potential clients as well. We also, very important, as Hazel said, we have the Real Assist program, which is like a real assist in hockey. It's something that's hands-on, really matters, helps our loan clients succeed. So we have a whole stable of wonderful mentors who will provide mostly pro bono support, and then we provide some funding for that. So as an example, I picked out one of our co-ops. This was a Black River Farm Co-op. It's a worker co-op. The members are land-based businesses. They have had to move, so they're between pieces of land right now, but they had a marvelous solution for protecting land for food. And we gave them a loan very early on for them to get started with their work. Quick overview, we work all across Ontario. We actually have partners in Northern Ontario because we know, I just remembered I should slow down. We know that the issues are different in Northern Ontario. So we actually have partners and staff in Northern Ontario. And we will fund a range of things, including working capital, land, equipment. So this is just our progress to date. We've actually broken through our targets. We've only been around since 2019. We raised money from community bonds and non-repayable contributions from government. So we've raised 1.75 million. We've placed over $1 million in loans. We have about 5 loans under review now. And this is a bit of the impact. You can see the jobs we create, which we track all these things. We also track environmental and social impacts, and that can be qualitative. So we're having, we're doing a lot with good impact measurement to be able to show that we are actually affecting local economies and building a resilient food system in Ontario. So that's it.
Wow, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for that, quick and thoughtful way of summing things up. Well, I mean, wow, we heard from 5 great speakers so far during this session, lots of great examples of tools and specific funds, lots to take home in terms of what folks are looking for. Just to highlight a few things that came out of it. Well, I mean, the first thing that struck me is that a number of things that were spoken about today, funds and tools, did not exist 10 years ago. So if you're hearing, if you're in New Brunswick and you're hearing Sally speak about the Fair Finance Fund and thinking, oh no, I'm not in Ontario, just think about 10 years ago, so many of what was shared today didn't exist. So it was thoughtful people who maybe took examples from other jurisdictions too, and got some support in getting some of those things up off the ground or expanding the mandates of some of those. So anything is possible, we're hearing today. So let's see, we heard about hybrid financing, we heard about sort of capacity assessment. complementarity of skills and how folks work together, as well as strength of the business plan in their field, sort of measures for the strength of applications. I liked when Brian said, start with those who love what you do. And then, of course, he shared some of the tools for those folks to put their money where their love is. And we heard some great examples from Hazel, too. And I know that Esteban Kelly joined us earlier in the conference, and they have great tools for providing some of those things that are hard to do at a smaller scale, including retirement investing and, you know, access to health care programs and so forth. So it's great to see the strength of federations and providing some of those needs. It's hard to do when you have a 4 or 10 person worker cooperative, but when you have this sort of scale, those things are possible. So I'm a big fan of federations. I just want to underscore that. So let's move now to questions and also comments and also examples. If folks have examples of tools and sort of methods of financing that have worked for you in your development, or roadblocks that you faced, and maybe want to bring it to the fore here so that we can help workshop it with you, we've got an open space to be able to allow that to happen. So do we have questions? Does anyone want to raise their hand and voice their question or add it to the chat? Or do any of the speakers, hearing the other speakers talk, did you want to add anything additional?
Erin,
Yes.
it's Hazel here. I have a question for Sally. How did you raise your capital in the Fair Finance Fund?
So it was a combination of community bonds and non-repayable contributions from grants. So that, which acts as our first loss capital, in giving confidence to our investors. We have approached both foundations who have social finance policies and individual retail investors. What we've actually found is that the individuals are more able to move. So that's where it's come from, is people who are concerned about having good local food systems, and often people who are concerned about climate change. So that's sort of been our key group. I mean, it's probably similar to Solar Share and that kind of thing.
Thank you, Sally. See, Reba has a question, and then Eric's on deck.
Hi, thank you, Erin. This is very timely for us because we just had a brainstorming meeting last night, and one thing that keeps coming up in our co-op is how do we survive in downtown Toronto with the cost of rent. So we're like, well, can we buy the building? This just keeps coming up as, you know, a big blue sky thing, but we're just like, we don't know how to get there. And then I went and I looked at Tapestry and I see, oh, it's $1,100 to have a 3-hour consultation just on bonds. As a worker co-op, we're not necessarily eligible for bonds. We can sell shares. We don't know how to do it. We have no debt. Like we've run our business for 25 years with no debt. And you know, so we don't know how to get somewhere from sort of zero to, you know, what does this building cost? $4 million or something? So, you know, is there somewhere, I know we could go to CWCF and get a technical assistance grant that gets us a small way there. Is there like somebody that we can bring in that's going to help us, like walk us through the whole process? Because it's kind of what we would need. So I don't know who can answer that, but
I'll jump in, Reba. Yeah, I get that, and I'm just in the middle of trying to figure out how to buy a venue for live music in downtown Toronto, and we've had serious chats with the owner of the property, and it's not easy to figure this stuff out. But I would suggest you go back to Tapestry, because they can provide you with all the confidence that you need to do it yourself. But it's going to, you know, obviously, it's going to cost some money, but it's money that's well worth investing. You'll find that Tapestry's rates really reflect their costs rather than that reflect markets. So you'll find that I see the inside finances, and I know that it operates on the basis of cost. So don't be scared away by that figure.
And Reba, can I just add, in addition to what Brian was saying, having the conversation with Tapestry, but reach out to us, reach out to other funders, have the conversation of what's possible so we can look at your statements and see, okay, you don't own the building currently. What is it worth? How much could you raise through community bonds? How much could you raise from members or other sources, grants, etc.? So, it's to the point that it doesn't have to be, and Hazel mentioned this, right? We're happy to work with all of the other funders because I think it works better, especially in this cooperative space, if not one organization is taking all the risk. And we might also be able to bridge to a community bond if you identify a space, but it takes longer, right? So there can be conversations already. We frequently have conversations with organizations that are not yet sure, to just understand what their situation is. And maybe you come back to us in 6 months, maybe you come back to us in 12 months when you're actually ready and you can identify the space. But we can look at what your actual capacity is. If you're interested in a loan, if you started conversations on community bonds, what else do you need in the meanwhile, etc. So don't hesitate, especially in this space, to reach out to the financing providers because we're happy to take the conversation.
So just a clarifying question, as we are not a nonprofit, so are we eligible for community bonds? It's been a little bit, I'm not sure on that one.
Brian,
yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. You can sell bonds or shares. You have the choice as you're a share capital co-op. Bonds are simply debt. So it's borrowing from people rather than having them buy your shares. Bonds feel more tangible than simply lending money. So you get something back in your hands that says it's a bond, and presumably if you're going to use it to buy property, you can secure it against the property, second to any outside financing you need through use of a trustee. Trustee holds a mortgage on the property for the benefit of all the bondholders or even shareholders. Depending on what you design, what you decide to do.
Thank you.
Thanks, Reba, and thanks, Brian. While you're there, Brian, can you just clarify? So if all of us are sitting around on heaps of gold bars and we want to invest in some of these projects, like maybe Reba's worker co-op buying a building, is it restricted by province typically?
Yes. Not-for-profits have a better situation than co-ops because it's clear there's an exemption for not-for-profits, not-for-profit co-ops, not-for-profits across the province, across the country, under all the Securities Acts. For co-ops, it's different. In Ontario, Ontario co-ops can only, with an offering statement, sell in Ontario. And you'd have to go and certainly Gailey, the big dairy farmers co-op, had to go to the Securities Commission in Manitoba to sell memberships and shares in Manitoba. It was a costly, miserable experience for them. And unfortunately, co-op regulation around securities is very much province-based, and unfortunately doesn't translate across the country.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Over to Eric.
You're all answering and asking questions in the same area that I want to. So Brian and Sally, you mentioned being nonprofit. Sally, yours is a nonprofit as well? Yeah. Is that expressly because of that latitude you have of attracting investment through community bonds and people outside of the province? What were the rationales for going to a nonprofit investment pool?
I'll give a quick answer and Brian can give the more formal answer. That's okay, Brian. Our rationale was extremely practical. We were on a very tight timeline because of the way our grant was working. So in order to be able to deploy keep the non-repayable contribution. We needed to incorporate and get going very quickly. And at that particular moment in time, the co-op, there was all the shifting going on with who was in charge of co-ops and the rules and everything. And we just, it was purely practical. I mean, my background's in co-ops. I would much rather have done it with a co-op, but we had to get going in early 2019. So,
Sally, are you a nonprofit cooperative?
no, we're a straight nonprofit. So that's what I mean, is that we had to, because of what looked like it might be real temporal barriers to doing it as a co-op, we had to go with the nonprofit, and we hemmed and hawed about it for a while, but that's what we ended up with.
Right.
So interestingly, when the Big Carrot, when we were incorporating it, the province of Ontario would not allow us to incorporate it as a cooperative because, as they said, oh, you can't have a co-op that provides employment. That's not cooperative. That's not within the definition of what a co-op is. And so the Big Carrot is a business corporation. So you make choices around what kind of corporate vehicles you use based on lots of circumstances, as Sally indicated. For Sally's fund, being a not-for-profit makes a lot of sense, because then clearly all of the assets are being applied for social purposes, and there's nobody there saying I need a return on my investment and so on, aside from, of course, the bondholders. But you know what kind of return they're looking for, because it's set out in the bond.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks for your question, Eric.
I have a question.
Please.
So, probably again for Ryan, but for anybody. I've been reviewing the guide for analysis of social enterprises from Cap Finance, and one of the things that's interesting to me is this concept of quasi-equity. Can you talk a little bit about what? I mean, I know that when we were working in renewable energy, we talked about how the community bonds themselves would be quasi-equity because they might be subordinated to other loans. But I'd really love to hear your input on that, or anybody.
Well, I can talk first. I know when we were selling bonds for Center for Social Innovation to buy their 2 big buildings in downtown Toronto, there were a number of people came along and said, "Oh, I'd like a piece of this, and let me have some equity." And we felt very good about saying no. We think we can finance without selling off any equity. So the CSI is a not-for-profit; it's not a co-op, but it no longer has the worry of an investor looking for a return based on an equity ownership. It is solely focused on applying its resources to doing what it does. That's a good thing to my mind. When we did the Big Carrot, the original financing that was found for the redevelopment had an equity component to it. We set up a separate holding corporation to hold the property, in which the Big Carrot owned 50% and the outside investor owned 50%. And the financing came from a private venture capital company who wanted to participate in the increase in value. And so, you know, it was successful. They've long since been paid out, and the financing there is conventional debt financing on the property side of it through the holding corporation. In the co-op itself, the members are financing it 100%, as far as I know.
Sally, could you repeat your question? Sorry, I missed. I know that it was on hybrid financing, but I missed the question on this.
I was asking about the term quasi-equity, and the idea that certain kinds of debt financing, like a community bond, when you go to a bank, fits into a category because it's a long-term liability that it can actually be used for you to leverage more conventional financing.
In the housing space, we see this a bit with CMHC. whenever they provide financing, sometimes with subordinated debt, and if it's, again, long enough, to your point, also if it's if repayments are based on residual cash flows rather than specifically interest rate driven, that could be seen as you know, financing that is not debt and it's not included in their debt service covenants. So I don't know if that's helpful, but those are some of the examples that we've seen in terms of other bigger lenders than us looking at other types of financing as subordinated and therefore not counting towards their debt.
I would just jump in here to say that from the Tenacity Works Fund perspective, we view, although everything we've done is technically a term loan, it functions as quasi-equity, and we've tried to take this approach that it's quite flexible from the perspective of how the co-ops can use the financing we provide to leverage in other financing, because we go behind them in terms of security. And so it really, it's like it's as though it were equity, but it literally is a term loan, and we do take security, personal property security, registry security, such that we're in there as a secured creditor, and they know that, and it's the case. But the whole time we're just being a very supportive partner, trying to provide, you know, free technical assistance to make sure they know what they're doing and stay strong, because they're a member of our federation and like they're part of us, right? So we look like a bank, but we act like a friend, sort of thing, right? So I think that is what we take quasi-equity to mean. And I think anybody in this space could be doing that, because there's nothing that stops you from it. Like you've taken all the rights on paper in this like 12-page loan agreement that was written by Laird Hunter, and we've adapted each time. Who's Laird Hunter, for those who don't know him, is like the Brian Eiler of the West. Anyways, so yeah, just steal our approach. We think it's a good one, and we hope other people will take it too.
We've also, Sally, to add to that, we've also considered, we didn't actually end up working out, and it was actually for a conversion, consider doing a revenue-based loans, right? So this would be where the payments would come out of a percentage of revenues, assuming they make enough revenues to be able to manage all of their debts. So setting the formula and all of those things. And I know that this is also the approach that, I don't know if you're familiar with, Scale Collaborative out on Vancouver Island. They're launching a fund that is doing for nonprofits pretty much exclusively revenue-based financing that would be quasi-equity, because it's participatory rather than just interest rate based. And I don't think that they're taking any collateral in this case, but there's nothing to say that you couldn't.
Great, thanks everyone. It's sounding like there's a theme, which is get in touch, know what tools are out there, get in touch with the fund managers and learn more in terms of what fits and what you'll need and where you'll need to be at with the development of your organization in order to see what the right approach will be. So lots of, now you know some of the faces connected to those funds and those tools. So hopefully that means that you won't be nervous to reach out, and Reva, we're all rooting for you and others who are at that place. I was going to say earlier, you're probably not the only one that has that question, but then I thought, geez, debt-free. Yeah, maybe, no, maybe you're the only one in that position with that question. Well, I want to thank all of our speakers today. We do still have a couple of minutes. We have a half an hour break before the next session, which is focused on marketing. Based on the teasers that I've seen so far, it looks to be like quite a good one. But I wondered if anybody had any closing questions or comments from the speakers or anyone else here before we close today. Go ahead, Hazel.
I have another question for Sally, who we should have been able to give 10 minutes to, I think. But anyways, you mentioned you have this Real Assist program, and you primarily have folks doing mentorship for free. So how do you find such mentors that can afford to do it for free?
Well, I had to sort of whiz past that, but so what we have, we make it very clear to the mentors what sort of budget we have and what our resources are, which are slim. It has been so far part of grants to be able to pay them. the hourly rate that they all get for 10 hours. So but they all know that's not, that's not a formal commitment. It's just, we do it as much as we can. So it's written into the future cash flow and everything that we would keep paying them. But there are also, a lot of them are, maybe they're retired professionals, or there are other organic farmers who are really happy to help a young farmer. So we've worked also where we've had a mentor who might have been paid by EFAO, so the Ecological Farmers Association, instead of us, because they're already working. So there's lots of different solutions. The one thing that I thought that happened, though, because we vet all our mentors, I think, and they're an extraordinary group. You can see some of them on our website. I'm so proud of who's working with us. We've ended up also getting contracts from non-clients just for our Real Assist program. It was never meant to be a revenue generating program, but because we have such a stellar group of people, so they also get paid that way. So far it's been working beautifully. We're really excited about it. And it is, I would add that that's not the only thing we do. We actually work with the clients for the entire 5 years. We promote them. We go back to them every 6 months to get their impact metrics, but also to see how they're doing and get their current stories. And we send that out. If they really get in trouble, we get in there as much as we can and help them. So it's a continuous process. We see this, I mean, this is an aspect of what's called relationship lending, right? We're right in there with them.
Thank you. All right, excellent. I think that brings us to time. I'm seeing lots of good discussion in the chat. Not necessarily questions for the panelists to address at this moment. Seems like we as a movement have some work to do, but certainly to acknowledge that there's so much work that has been done. And I know a lot of folks who did some of that heavy lifting are on the call. So thank you to all of you. I look at Tom Webb and I say this, someone who's been appropriately griping about the capital woes of cooperatives for a long time, and writing and thinking and sharing and getting people talking about it. But to see a lot of these solutions arise is just very encouraging, and makes, makes a broader cooperative economy more possible, of course. So thank you to all of you. Thank you to our panelists. Thanks for everyone for attending, and see you all back here in a half an hour for the marketing session.